All right, tonight is speaker night, and I'm going to ask Tamara to come up to introduce my grand sponsor, her sponsor, Melissa.
Thank you. My name's Tamara, and I'm an addict. I was sitting there thinking about when I met Melissa, and this just kind of popped in my head. I met her several years back the first time that she was in Oklahoma, and I remember, I met her through my ex-husband and her husband were friends and hanging out, and I immediately thought, oh shit, here's another girl I gotta be nice to, and but because that happened a lot, but immediately I clicked with her, and then over the years I got to be better friends with her and got to know her a lot more, and a couple years back I wasn't really getting anywhere with my sponsor, and I found myself calling Melissa, and she wasn't even my sponsor, but I was calling her all the time because she became my voice of reason. And I've had a really rough year, and I can't even remember how long she's been my sponsor now, but I asked her to be my sponsor a couple years back, and she's been my sponsor ever since. But she's helped me through one of the roughest years of my life, and I've managed to get through it clean, so she's always been my voice of reason, and sometimes she pisses me off. But when she pisses me off, it's really because I need to hear it. And come on up here, Melissa. I love you.
I'm Melissa, and I'm an addict. You always know you're doing something right if you piss them off. And I'd like to thank you for having me to come speak. I haven't done this in a while, but thank you for letting me come up here. And I just want to say something before I start something. This is the perkiest bunch of newcomers in this meeting I've ever seen. And I love this meeting. And this meeting is I'm from California, and my clean date is June 28th, 1996. And 24. Which all that means is now I'm old, really old. But I came to Narcotics Anonymous like everybody else did. My story isn't much different than anybody else's. I'm a tweaker by nature. I like to run on old, red, dirty roads, chase other people's husbands, and be stupid. That's the way it was for me. And but I got here as a result of a violent relationship and years of very bad choices. I was a woman who never really had much self-esteem. I never had, I had a mother that when I was 5 or 6 years old took me to a counselor and said, "Fix this bitch, I hate her." That was the introduction to my self-hatred, because I figured that I was too little to be hated. And so that's where it began for me. It began for me with, never being listened to as a child, never being told that I was loved, never having a father in my house. The only dad figure we had was my sister's dad, and he was the president of the Mongols, and that wasn't any fun. And so I never saw much of anything healthy. I didn't even know what healthy was, and sometimes I still don't know what healthy is, but it took a really long time, 2 very bad marriages, raising 2 kids by myself. It was just that kind of stuff, single motherhood. I never made a good choice in my whole freaking life until I came to Narcotics Anonymous. And even then, I didn't realize it was a choice. I didn't realize that staying clean was a choice. So when I got clean, the day that I woke up in the morning, and the man I was with he was in a bad mood. I had been starting to think, where you get that thinking where maybe this stuff just isn't working for me anymore, where those decisions that you make are just too heavy to bear anymore. And just the thought of losing one more thing was too much. It was too much. And my youngest daughter, who was about 5 at the time, was there, and I wouldn't go get him any drugs. I said, I don't want to. My kid's here. My mother finds out, because I lost custody of my children. My mother had my youngest one, and my oldest one went with her father through a nasty custody battle. And he was mad because I turned the TV to Rugrats so my daughter could watch Rugrats, and mad because I wouldn't go get him any dope. And I said, this is enough. And I went into a glass table as he was attacking me. He went towards my daughter. I grabbed my daughter and I left. And I never looked back. I called my mother and I said, Mom, this is probably, and she even told me this was the first time she'd ever heard me be honest about anything, was that I said, I can't do this anymore. I don't know how I'm not going to do this anymore, but I can't do this anymore, and will you take me to the women's shelter? See, I'd been there prior because of this relationship and stayed, and then went back because he was going to be different, and I was going to be different, because I'll tell you the truth. I was never the woman that you ever wanted to be in a relationship with, ever, because it wasn't all their fault. He'd throw something at me, I'd throw something back at him. It's just the way it was. But when that night I went and spent the night with my mother, and I told her I just don't know what I'm going to do. I just can't get loaded anymore. I said, I'm tired of, God, I'm getting emotional here. I'm tired of living without my children. I'm tired of living with whatever. I had no spirit. I didn't even know what spirit was. I never had a religious upbringing, and I figured that God guy I knew was there, but I'm sure he hated me. And I didn't have any of that, and I didn't have anything inside, to be honest. So I called the women's shelter, and that's where I got clean. And I went in there and was the good little honest drug addict. Told them I had 6 days, that I had 6 months clean, and I think I had 3 days by that time. Yeah, well, because they wouldn't let you in unless you had 6 months clean, and I was a little desperate. So, but because I told them that I had 6 months clean, I had to go to Narcotics Anonymous meetings, and I said, okay. Well, I had heard of Narcotics Anonymous meetings because in California, that was when drug court started. And I had a girlfriend, that she was the connection, but I had went and bought a court card for $10 from the connection so I could give it to my mother so I could see my children. We go to any lengths to do what we're going to do in your addiction. So, I bought that court card, and that was the only reason my mother was letting me see my kids. And but I had a friend who was in drug court, and he used like I used, and he stole cars, and he did all that good stuff that we do. And I figured, well, if that sucker can get clean in that NA thing, because that's what I called you guys at first, that NA thing, and if I could go to those meetings, maybe they might help me. And like I said, that gift of desperation, which I didn't realize was a gift of desperation at the time, I just knew that I didn't want to get loaded anymore. So the first meeting I went to was at the Parr House. It's a recovery home back in the little town I'm from, and actually it's in Porterville, California. And I went into that meeting, and I saw 2 things. One, there's boys in here, because, whatever gets you to that meeting at first. And 2, they're talking about me. They're talking about me, and I was like, how did they know these things were happening to me when other women were talking about how they lost their children, and other people had lost bad marriages, and other people had had violent relationships like mine, and I didn't know these people. I didn't know these people. And that very first meeting, I had tears go down my face. Now, I was a tough chick, and I wasn't crying in front of anybody, but that day I did. I did. And so that's where it all started for me. And I would go to meetings, and it wasn't necessarily that I even liked them at first. It was just that I knew they did something for me, and I would go to meetings, and I would sit and listen, and I would go to meetings, and I would sit and listen, and then you people hugged me, and I thought that was the weirdest shit that ever happened in my life. I was like, I'm not sure about this hugging stuff. And because I'd never had that. I never had that as a child. I never had that in my adult relationships. I just never did, because I was one of them women who were like this, who wanted you to come closer, but you better stay that far away. And so that's how it all began for me. But I was going to this one meeting, and it was the fifth tradition meeting of Narcotics Anonymous, and it was on Thursday nights. And now that meeting was my home group for 18 years before we moved to Oklahoma. And it was called the marble meeting because they gave you marbles for various lengths of clean time for the marbles that you lost while you were out using. And you got little marbles to begin with, but once you got some clean time, you got big ass marbles. And but I loved that meeting. I love that meeting because, everybody needs a home group. Everybody needs a home group, and that was mine. And I just started to feel a little better. I didn't realize that I had I didn't realize that I had a spirit. I didn't know what a spirit was. I didn't know that was the thing that made you feel alive again, that made you feel like you mattered and made you feel like you had something besides yourself. I didn't know all that stuff. So I would go to that meeting, and then you people started talking about I needed a sponsor. Now, I knew that they kept talking about how important it was to have a sponsor, and if I got a sponsor, that maybe I could work those steps that they talked about, and if I worked those steps, then maybe I didn't have to use again one day at a time. So I went to the meanest, orneriest little, heroin addict chick I could find, because I figured she was meaner than me, and she talked like me, but she had this sweet little spirit. Her name was Marty C. And she had this sweet little spirit. So I grabbed that court card that I had bought from the Connection, and I took it to her, and I said, you guys keep talking about that I have to be honest. So I gave her that court card, and I said, I didn't go to these meetings, and this is the first thing I've ever been honest about. And I said, will you sponsor me? And she said, but you're a tweaker. And I'm a heroin addict. She goes, we don't kind of mix. I said, well, you made really good crime partners, so can you just take me? I was just messing with her. But that woman taught me, oh God, she taught me a lot. So the first thing that she did with me, and she told me that I needed to get a basic text, because back then we only had a basic text in the home life, but we didn't have all this other fancy stuff. And I didn't have any money, so I heard somebody share in the meeting, if you don't have a book, steal one. So I went back to the women's shelter and I stole one. You guys told me to do it. I thought it was okay. So I got that book, and there was just something about it, because she had me do was read that book 10 minutes a day, because she said anything after 10 minutes was bullshit. So I would read 10 minutes a day, and I would get out a piece of paper, and she told me to write about feelings, and I'm like, well, what the fuck are those? I don't know what feelings are. And she goes, it's the stuff that makes you really happy, makes you sad, makes you angry. And I'm like, okay. So I started to work on a first step, and I didn't realize exactly how unmanageable my life was. I had no control over where I lived. I had no control over where my children lived. I had no control over any emotions. I didn't have any of that kind of stuff. In fact, I used to sit in chairs and rock all the time. People probably thought I was a mental health case, but I probably was. Narcotics Anonymous is not a hotbed of mental health. I just want everybody to know that, okay? So, but I would sit and rock, and I would read that book, and And I got to the part in the book where it talked about the unmanageability. And I got that first real tears. It wasn't, I just cried because I was like, oh my God, that book is talking about me. I never had any identification with anything until I came to Narcotics Anonymous. I had nothing. So I wrote my first step. I wrote about my unmanageability. Actually, she had me write how I was powerless over my addiction and what was unmanageable about my life. Like I said, we didn't have step working guides or anything like that. It was just that simple. And I put that pen to paper, and that pen just kept going and going and going. And I felt proud of myself. For the first time in my life, I finished something. I didn't know. I had no follow through for shit. For nothing in my whole life, I had no follow through. But what happened is, where that basic text says, there is a spiritual void once you're done with the first step. So I went to step 2, and I came to believe in something bigger than me, and it filled that void. And then I had to identify, the insane behaviors that I had. Well, I had lots of insane behavior. I thought it was pretty normal stuff for me, but it was normal to hear you guys talk about it, and which made it okay for me to think about it, but that's where all my step work came for me. And I started doing, we started going to area service. Now, we used to call area service area circus where we're from. And I really believe that lots of times telling people ask me, well, you want to go to a meeting? And I'd say, okay. You want to go to area service? I say, sure, okay. I swear to God, I stayed clean from just saying okay sometimes. I did, and I started doing service work when I didn't even know what service work was. Service work to us was, go make coffee, go pick up cigarette butts, and one of the best things that that my sponsor had me do, and it was so humbling to me because she had me go ask each woman in every meeting I could find a woman in, because they didn't have very many women clean where I was. And she made me go ask them for their phone number. We didn't have nice little fancy phone lists. You had to go ask people, and when I got to my third step, I kind of understood why I was asking people, because it gave me humility. And see, I thought humility was a bad thing. I thought, okay, humility just means you're looking stupid, and that's not what it meant, and I was finding a little bit of peace. Every time I worked a step, I found a little bit of peace in things. But then I started to have fun in recovery, because if you're not having fun in recovery, you're doing shit wrong. You're doing stuff wrong. And, for years, I never had fun at anything. Never. And we would go to activities, and we would go to speaker meetings, and we would go all over the place. California's a big ass state, so we went a lot of places, just trying to have a good time. And and when I got there, came to Narcotics Anonymous, I vowed I would never, ever, ever get in another relationship. In fact, I used to do really rotten shit when I got clean, because I hated men. Sorry, I hated every one of you suckers. And sorry, that was the way it was. And a man would walk past me in a meeting, and I'd be sitting next to my sponsor, and I would trip him. Just for fun. I was like, I'm going to trip that big man, and I'd do it. And because I had this utter, complete hatred for men, and she told me that I had to be nice to men, and I said, oh God, I don't want to. And but I did it. I learned how to be nice to men without expecting them to have something from me, and so I stayed alone for a very, very long time. I stayed alone for 8 years. I didn't date. I didn't do any of that stuff. I learned how to like me. before and love who I was. You know, because I didn't like me when I got in here, and I was like, hell, the hell am I going to like anybody else? And I really didn't want to bring my insanity, my current insanity or past insanity, into something new. I didn't want to do that. You know, so, you know, I did really neat things like that women's shelter that I lived in. They ended up sending me to college, and I went to school, and I became a supervisor at that place eventually. I was the case management coordinator for 2 38-bed emergency shelters. From going to school and doing the things that they had asked me to do, and if you would have told me that I could do anything like that, I would have told you, you know. But we recover. And we recover into things that we have absolutely no idea that we're going to do, you know, because I don't know about you, but my higher power always has a better plan than me. So, but after that, I just started working steps. I got to that 4th step, and it was hard. It was hard. And, you know, all I had to do in that 3rd step was just, you know, believe. You know, I came to believe, and then I had to learn how to let go. I still don't let go of things sometimes without it having claw marks in it. That's just the way that it is. But I got to my 4th step, and I had so much pain about that 4th step that my sponsor made me stop. She made me stop because I really wasn't emotionally ready to do that 4th step yet. But what I did is I hung out more with the people in the fellowship. I asked questions of other people. How did your 4th step go? And then once it was finally done, she gave me the best, you know, ounce of... all she told me was that you've already been through this stuff. All you got to do is put it on paper. Because I need shit simple. I need shit simple to this day, you know. But, you know, that 4th step wasn't necessarily the most freeing thing for me at first. But I got to that 5th step, and I told you she was a little bitty ornery heroin addict lady. So what we did is I went and I did my 5th step with her, and once I did that 5th step, she says, okay, get in the car. And I'm like, okay. So we burned my, you know, back then you burn shit. You burned your 4th step, whatever. You burned it and it was all done. And so what we did is we got in the car, and she says, now I don't want you to say a word. Now, coming from a little ex-heroin addict, I mean, that means we're going to steal shit. That's all only thing I have. We're going to go steal shit. And so my wonderful sponsor says, don't say anything. And she ran into this orange grove and stole a whole bag of oranges and put it on there. She goes, we'll put that in your next 5th step, okay? So, I mean, told you she was ornery as hell. But you know that lady who, she taught me about God. She taught me how to have dignity for myself. She taught me how to not hate men anymore. She taught me how to be a mom. But, you know, she had a horrible breakdown. See, she had her own things to live with. She had been, her family had taken her and sold her off as a kid, and she couldn't handle it even after all these years of recovery. And she had a major breakdown, and so she couldn't sponsor anybody anymore. You know, broke my heart, and she relapsed. And the relapse didn't last long, but it hurt her. And so what she told me is this: if you have to get another sponsor, you get another sponsor. And she goes, I only was meant to get you so far. You know, and when she finally passed away, I was able to help with her on just a little bit of her funeral, because the gratitude I had for that woman, it was immeasurable, you know. And so what I did is I went and I got a different sponsor, and it was a little hard, but she worked well for me too. But by that time, I was going to college. I was seeing my children. I didn't get my children back until I had 3 years clean. And them little suckers stayed a really long time. So like they were 35 and shit. I mean, that's just the way that it is. You know, back and forth. And but I got those kids back, and my mother was with me, and me and my mother had our differences and had our put away our differences, because one of the good things that Marty, my first sponsor, did was, because every time I would cry, you know, because you have moments where you go to tears around here, and my mother would take me and get me drug tested every time I cried. I just know you're using. I said, Mom, I'm not using. Okay, but I said, okay, and she'd take me and get me drug tested. And so when I lived with my mother until, like, I had about 3 years clean. And I had finally started, where I had my youngest daughter in my house. I wanted my oldest daughter to live with me, and my mother didn't. She didn't. And I never stood up to my mother very often. You know, even as an adult woman, I just didn't. I just kind of did what she said, and it was just the way it was. I didn't make truly any of my own decisions until she passed away when I had 6 years clean. But when she passed away, the good thing about step work is that I had no undone business with her. No undone business. I had done an 8th and 9th step. I had did all of that. And you know, she kind of liked me. She did. She kind of liked me. And that was weird, to be honest. She would give me her car keys and say, here, go to the bank with my bank card. And I'm like, are you fucking crazy, woman? I'm like, but I did it. I did it. And that was all a process of doing step work. And like I said, when she passed away, I had no undone business with her. In fact, she died when I had 6 years clean. I buried her 3 days after I had, 3 days after that. But I had all those kids back with me. And like I said, before she passed, she didn't want my oldest daughter to live with me because she hated my first husband immensely, because he had done some things that was really the thing that really set my using off. He didn't keep his hands to himself with my kids. And my mother hated him for it. Now, I had to forgive him in a 4-step just to keep me sane. I had to forgive him for me, because I didn't want to live with that kind of hatred anymore. But my mother always said, if you got a resentment to get rid of, Melissa, I'll hold it for you. And she did. She did. But I got those kids back by myself, and my mother moved in with my sister. And then I had these 2 little girls and me. I had 3 years clean. I owned my own car, had my own house, got my education, had a great job. No man was happy about it at that time. And I was doing all the things that Narcotics Anonymous said I could get a freaking life. Because that book doesn't promise we're going to get a bunch of fancy shit or a house or kids back. All it promises is one day free from active addiction. But if you start doing stuff, and you're going to get a life. And I had them kids back, and the first night they were back, home with me, I was like, oh God, what am I going to do with them now? And I was terrified. And I'm really glad that this, for the time it took me to get those kids back, because I remember having 60 days clean and thinking, I heard somebody share a couple of weeks ago here, they were mad because they couldn't have those kids back yet. Well, don't be mad. Be grateful. Because my head will tell me I'm ready for anything. But at 3 years clean, I'm sitting with these kids in the house, and they come and kiss me goodnight, and I'm going to my room, and I'm just crying because I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to lose this shit again. Because that's my thinking. My thinking always goes to the worst thing, worst case scenario. But we did okay for a while, and then my youngest daughter hit 14 and lost her fucking mind. And she did. Sorry for the cussing, but she did. And I had to call women in the program, like, what do I do? What do I do? And I'm my little drug addict self. By that time, I'm a licensed counselor. I'm fucking somebody now. I should know when my daughter's using. And I didn't. And it was hard, and it was rough. And both of my daughters have a story. Because I remember that little one that I said lost her mind. I remember, my favorite chip is my 30-day chip. And it's because we used to have this great big meeting in where I'm from, and it was at the Guadalupe Mission, and it was a huge meeting. And I didn't know I was supposed to go up and get a chip at all. And my little one, who, I drugged those kids to meetings with me. But I took him to a meeting, and my youngest one says, "Hey, Mama, I think you have that 30-day thing. You're supposed to go get one of those. Come on." And she grabbed my hand and made me get my 30-day chip. And there was at one point where I got to give her a year chip. Because that's Narcotics Anonymous. So... but those kids, and they stayed a long time, and I got one through high school, and her father died, and it was just, because life happens in Narcotics Anonymous. It doesn't say, that book doesn't say, shit ain't gonna happen. I had buried my mother and my brother, and then I had teenage girls all by myself that would gang up on me. And because I had a counselor one time tell him, "You guys have a say in your house." Well, that fucked shit up for years. It did for years, and so I remember, and I hate it when I say, it's because I'm trying to think too hard. But we got on track to a certain extent. And about 8 years clean, I'm a member of the fellowship, and I did a lot of service work, and I did chair for area service a couple of times. I mean, I did a whole bunch of stuff. I just did stuff because it kept me clean. It kept me clean. But at that time, I was like a little over 300 pounds, and I finally got unhappy with me, because I figured if I stayed real happy, them men would leave me the hell alone. If I was real heavy, I didn't care. And that took step work to figure that shit out, But because I had a desperate thing about, and it was just because I was terrified of men. I was terrified of them, and I had a lot of violence. And so at about 7 years clean, I decided maybe I needed, because, eventually you're going to have to address your health because you get older, but at that time I think I was 37 years old or something like that. And I was 300 pounds, and I woke up in the morning and I couldn't breathe, and I had asthma horribly. I lived by orange groves, and I don't know if any of you ever been by orange groves, but they're beautiful. But if you're allergic to them, they're going to tear your ass up. And I had asthma, and I couldn't breathe anymore. And I woke up one morning and I said, "God, I just can't do this anymore. And a little over a year later, I'd lost 130 pounds. Bought me a tan and some short dresses. I figured, why not? Because, that low self-esteem that I had lived off of for years needed to be higher self-esteem, And so I did all those things, and I hadn't let a man in the house. I hadn't had anybody in the house, and I just couldn't do it because I was afraid if I let a man in the house too early, I would put my attention on that man, and my children wouldn't get what they needed from me. So like I said, I lost 130 pounds, and I was working hard, and my kids were doing okay. They didn't want to kill me all the time then. But I went to area service. And here walked in that big biker over there. And he was pretty. He was pretty. I'm sorry, he was pretty. He had on these holy anchor blue shorts and a tank top, and he probably didn't have as many teeth then as he does now. And I thought, oh God, I gotta have him. And I was friends with his cousin because I used to use with his cousin, and his cousin's like, "You better leave him alone." I said, "I will not. I will not leave him alone. That's going to be mine." And he didn't know yet, but I'm like, that's going to be mine. And so she said, "Well, he's got a crazy girlfriend." I said, I don't care. You know, old behavior coming up in my mind. I don't care if he's got a crazy girlfriend. So that's why, because, you know, I was still a little sick then. And so he would come in the area service and he'd say hi to me. And I just kind of look at him like, oh, God, you're beautiful. And I couldn't even hide it. I was like, huh, you know, being a dumb girl. And I'd ask him if he had got rid of that crazy girlfriend. And he'd say, oh, no. And I'd go, okay. And then the next month he'd come to area service. You still got that crazy girlfriend? Yeah. Yeah, I do. And I'd be like, okay. And then the next month he goes, can I have your phone number? I don't have that crazy girlfriend anymore. I was like, yeah. Didn't know what to do with him at the time, but I was like, okay, I'm still getting that. But you know, but God bless him, he was a whore at that time. Well, he was. He told you he was pretty. And so I dated him for a little bit. That didn't work. And I was like, shit, I just knew that one was mine, you know. And so he called me a while after that and apologized to me. He says, you know, what are you doing? I said, why are you calling me? I don't even like you. I said, you're a mean man. I don't want to talk to you. You know, because I know how to hate a man real easy. And so, and I think I hung up. I don't know what I did. But then maybe the next day or a couple hours later, I don't know, he called me back and he says, and I felt this heartfelt amends. He says, I'm sorry for what I did to you. You did not deserve what I did. And I said, okay. And he says, can we be friends? Can we go somewhere? I said, I'm going to go to a meeting. You know, meetings are safe. And we've been together ever since. I mean, we've been together 17 years, but we've been married 15 years. Because he's wonderful still. But what that taught me, because I think Lance and Tamara and I were talking about relationships one night at that Way Out West group. Because, you know, when you get here and you're looking around the rooms and you're looking for that big guy who's got enough tattoos and you really don't know if he's still living with his mama yet, but he's still perfect. And he's gonna be mine, you know. And then, you know, it's the same with the women. You know, I want to let you people know that women do the same shit. You know, it's one of those things that until you're ready for a relationship in here, I have seen more people relapse over a relationship than any other thing. Because when you're getting well from the waist down instead of the waist up, you might got a problem. Okay, so you might want to take a look at that if you're doing that. Because, you know, you guys are a bunch of perky newcomers. That's just what happens, you know. And it's just one of those things. I mean, because, you know, when you get here, you get a relationship with, I'm going to give you a rundown of what Steve T from Hawaii shared at a Bakersfield convention. And if you don't know what step work is, and if you're making step work real hard and you're making it crazy, he explained it like this. He said, steps 1, 2, and 3, you get right with a God. 4, 5, 6, and 7, you get right with yourself. 8 and 9, you get right with others. And 10, 11, and 12, you stay right with God, yourself, and others. That's step work in a nutshell. But if you're not in a relationship, if you're in a relationship and you're not working your own program and he's not working his own program, then guess what? People are going to have a problem. Because I know there's some people in here with very long relationships in Narcotics Anonymous. And you got to work the steps. There's not every day that my household is happy, joyous, and free. You know, but the things we don't do, we don't call each other names, we don't raise a hand to each other. God had he had a sense of humor because he's an ex-spousal abuser and I'm an ex-domestic violence counselor. God had a sense of humor. But it's, see, because the relationships that I know that I needed to build first was one, my relationship with just sitting in that chair. You know, because it was hard for me when I first moved here from California, because I didn't know you bunch of Okies. I didn't know you. And you guys did stuff different than we did in California. And which got me in trouble a couple times because I may be a little lippy in a service meeting every once in a while. And which I had to calm that shit down because I needed to learn how you guys did stuff, because you're still Narcotics Anonymous, and just because you didn't do it the way where I came from didn't mean it was wrong. And but the relationships that you build here are like, you got to build a relationship with yourself. You got to build a relationship with a higher power. You just got to build a relationship with walking in that door. Because that door is important, because that door goes in and out. And people die here. I had a friend named Monty back home. He was a big old pretty biker. I don't know why I would think that, but he was a big old pretty biker. And he had this wonderful girlfriend named Margaret. And he was a mortician.
Interesting.
Narcotics Anonymous had their own mortician. And he was a very kind man, always gentle, always gave the women a side hug. He was never inappropriate. He never did any of that. But he never did a 4-step. He never did a 4-step. And he used to have to go to therapy 3 times a week just for his job. And he would go to meetings and go to meetings and go to meetings, but he never did a 4-step. And the man never did a 4-step until he shot himself in his garage and killed himself because he could not live with some secret that he had. And it was such a loss. It was such a loss to the fellowship. Now, I don't want to see that happen to anybody else, because our disease is cunning. It's just a stupid thing. Our disease is just dumb. It doesn't like us. It wants us to die. It doesn't want you to see your kids. It doesn't want you to have anything good in your life. But 12 steps do. When I moved here, my husband we'd just got through 3 years of cancer with him. And it was hard when we moved here because he had just got done with having cancer and getting over a big major surgery in Stanford, in California. And then we moved here because our kids, it was kind of a struggle. It was a struggle for us. And their kids called us and said, "Hey, Mom, Dad, you want to move to Oklahoma?" And I'm like, "You out of your fucking mind?" And they said, well, Tim told them, he says, "You find me a house and a job because I don't want to live with you guys." And a little while later, they called us with a house and a job. And I think we moved in like 2 weeks maybe, or less. I don't know. It was just like, it just went like that. And that's how we ended up in Oklahoma. And then when he got here, he had a basketball-sized hernia as a result of not listening to the doctor. Because my husband is the hardest working man you'll ever meet in your life. And he has had several surgeries. He just had one a couple weeks ago. He has a chronic medical condition that is his, but I help him deal with that. So step work is very important. Being a part of a fellowship during any of that kind of time is important because Narcotics Anonymous is what got us through all those years. I mean, they got us where Stanford in California was 4 or 5 hours away from where we live. People got us there. If we needed money to get there, people got us there. They had like this party the day before he had to go get his big surgery. And the gratitude sitting in that party, because they just wanted him to know he was loved and he was prayed for. And once we got there, we sat down and I couldn't talk because the gratitude that I had for all these people, just like you guys, that helped us get through the most horrible time in our life. Because, I waited a long freaking time for a husband. He wasn't getting to go nowhere. But what I did through those times, and if you have a medical issue through those times, you better stay connected to your fellowship. You better be working steps and have unmovable faith like I did when he had cancer. You know, he still has the disease that caused that cancer. And he deals with a whole bunch of stuff. But you got to work steps in order to be able to go from one thing to the other, to the other. You know, it's one of those things when life on life's terms shows up, your program better show up. I mean, how many surgeries you've had this year, George? Lots. Lots. You know, and if you have a spouse in Narcotics Anonymous, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, you're going to learn how to do in sickness and in health. Or it'll tear you apart. Those things. But Narcotics Anonymous has taught me how to be there for other people, how to be there for my husband, and how to be there for myself. Because you know what? I'm not that girl who's afraid of everybody anymore. You know, and the thing about with men is like 2 years ago, I had to have my face reconstructed because it fell apart inside from old injuries. And I didn't talk about it very much in the fellowships. My friends knew, but I didn't talk about why. It's because when you get beat in the face too much, everything collapses. And it took 23 years for it to all collapse. And Greg and my husband took me to that surgery, and the doctor looked over at him and said, everything inside there is crushed. I lived with that a long time. You see, because all that past trauma will catch up with you if you don't do steps. I still have trauma responses to this day. You know, I'm one of them, what do they call it? I have high-functioning anxiety. It's just a fucking meme on Facebook is what it is. But high-functioning anxiety. But I'm a quietly anxious person. You see, because when I had 13 years clean, I was sitting in my office and I was running a county treatment office, and my face slid, and I didn't know what was happening. My face slid, and I couldn't move. I was able to call the nurses because they had public health nurses in my office, and they got me to the hospital.